I never thought a piece of metal on wheels would nearly bankrupt me. But that's exactly what happened when I parked my 32-foot RV on my own property in Pine Ridge, Colorado. My name is Owen Ashford, and I'm a 41-year-old software developer who works remotely from my home office. I'd saved up for 3 years to buy that RV, a beautiful 2023 model with all the bells and whistles. My plan was simple. Take my girlfriend Sarah and hit the road for a few weeks every summer, exploring national parks and getting away from the screen for a while. The problem started the day I drove it home and parked it in my driveway. I live on Meadowbrook Lane, a quiet street in a neighborhood called Sunset Heights. When I bought my house 2 years ago, I knew there was a homeowners association, but the previous owner assured me they were reasonable and mostly just handled landscaping for the common areas. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn mowed, and never thought twice about it. That changed approximately 48 hours after my RV arrived. I was in my kitchen making coffee when I heard the doorbell ring. Through the window, I could see a woman in her mid-50s standing on my porch, holding a clipboard and wearing what I can only describe as an expression of profound disgust. I opened the door with a smile, assuming she was a neighbor stopping by to introduce herself. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I'm Linda Patterson, president of the Sunset Heights Homeowners Association," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And yes, you can help me by removing that monstrosity from your driveway immediately." I blinked. "Excuse me." She gestured toward my RV with her pen like it was a rotting carcass. "That vehicle is in direct violation of our community standards. Section 7. Subsection C of the HOA bylaws clearly states that recreational vehicles, boats, and commercial vehicles may not be stored in view of the street." "I just bought it," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "I'm planning to take it on a trip next week. It's only going to be here temporarily." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Temporarily or not, it's a violation. You have 24 hours to move it or you'll be fined $500. My jaw dropped. $500 for parking something in my own driveway. "Those are the rules, Mr. Ashford. Everyone in this neighborhood agreed to follow them when they purchased their property. You're no exception." She tore off a yellow sheet from her clipboard and thrust it at me. "This is your official violation notice. Have a good day." She turned and walked back to her silver Lexus before I could respond. I stood there holding the paper, my coffee growing cold in my other hand, trying to process what had just happened. I'd been threatened with a $500 fine for parking my own vehicle on my own property. That evening, I dug out the massive stack of paperwork from when I'd bought the house. Buried somewhere in there was the HOA documentation, which I admittedly hadn't read very carefully. After an hour of searching, I found the bylaws and flipped to Section 7. Sure enough, there it was. Recreational vehicles, including but not limited to motor homes, travel trailers, and campers, shall not be stored or parked in driveways, yards, or any location visible from the street for more than 48 hours. I sat back in my chair, frustrated but willing to compromise. The rule seemed excessive, but I figured I could work something out. I had a decent-sized backyard with a gate on the side of the house. If I could get the RV back there, it wouldn't be visible from the street. Problem solved. The next morning, I spent 3 hours carefully maneuvering the RV through my side gate and into my backyard. It was tight, and I had to remove a section of fence temporarily, but I managed it. The RV sat on a flat area of my property, completely hidden from the street by my house and fence. I felt pretty good about the solution. That feeling lasted exactly 2 days. Linda showed up again, this time with another woman who introduced herself as Brenda Kirkwood, the HOA's vice president. They didn't even knock, just rang the doorbell repeatedly until I answered. "Mr. Ashford, we've received reports that you've damaged community property," Linda said, her arms crossed. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Brenda spoke up, her voice nasal and condescending. "Your fence. You removed part of it without HOA approval. Any modifications to structures visible from common areas require written permission from the board." "I put the fence back up," I protested. "It looks exactly like it did before, and I had to do it to move the RV into my backyard like you demanded." "Nevertheless, it's a violation," Linda said. "That's another $500. I felt my blood pressure rising. "You're fining me for following your previous order." "We're fining you for making unauthorized modifications," Linda corrected. "And I'm afraid there's another issue. Your RV is still on the property." "It's in my backyard," I said slowly, as if talking to a child. "You can't see it from the street." "But it's still on the lot," Brenda said. "The bylaws prohibit RV storage on any part of your property, visible or not." I grabbed the bylaws I'd left on the hall table. "That's not what this says." "It specifically mentions visibility from the street." Linda pulled out her own copy and flipped to a different page. Section 12, subsection F. No recreational vehicles shall be permanently stored on any lot within the community. Your RV has been here for 4 days. That constitutes permanent storage. "Permanent," I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "I own it. Where else am I supposed to keep it when I'm not using it?" "That's not our concern," Linda said. "You have 24 hours to remove it from the property entirely, or you'll face an additional fine of $1,000 per day until compliance is achieved." They left me standing there, stunned. $1,000 per day. That was insane. I immediately called the number listed for HOA management and left a message requesting a hearing before the board. According to the bylaws, I had the right to contest any violation. They called back the next afternoon and scheduled a hearing for the following Thursday, 6 days away. In the meantime, I started doing research. I joined online forums for people dealing with HOA issues and read horror stories that made my situation look mild. I also discovered something interesting. My property was unique in the neighborhood. When I looked at the original subdivision plat maps at the county recorder's office, I learned that my lot had been part of a larger parcel that was added to the development later. The original HOA documents had been written before my section was even part of the neighborhood. I brought this up to a real estate attorney named Marcus Chen, who I found through a referral. He was a sharp guy in his early 30s who listened to my story with increasing interest. "This is actually more common than you'd think," Marcus said, tapping his pen on his desk. "HOAs often expand their jurisdiction without properly updating their governing documents. Let me ask you something. Did you specifically agree to join the HOA when you bought your house?" I thought back. The seller mentioned it, and it was in the disclosure. "But I don't remember signing anything separate." "That's what I thought," Marcus said. "Colorado law requires that HOA membership be clearly established through deed restrictions or recorded covenants. If your property was annexed into the HOA after the original covenants were recorded, they would need your explicit consent or a properly recorded amendment affecting your specific parcel." He requested copies of all my property documents, and I sent them over. While I waited for his analysis, the HOA hearing date arrived. The meeting was held at a community center on the edge of the neighborhood. When I walked in, I found 5 board members seated at a long table, Linda in the center, Brenda to her right, and 3 others I didn't recognize. About a dozen residents sat in chairs arranged in rows, apparently there to watch the proceedings. Linda called the meeting to order with officious formality. We're here to address the violations committed by Mr. Owen Ashford of 847 Meadowbrook Lane. Mr. Ashford, you have 10 minutes to present your case. I stood, my notes in hand, and explained everything. How I'd only had the RV for a few days, how I'd moved it to comply with their first demand, and how the fines were excessive and contradictory. I also mentioned that I was investigating whether the HOA had proper authority over my property at all. Linda's expression turned stony. Mr. Ashford, every property owner in Sunset Heights is subject to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. You don't get to pick and choose which rules apply to you. I'm not trying to, I said. I'm just asking for reasonable treatment. I need somewhere to keep my RV when I'm not traveling. I'm willing to keep it in my backyard where no one can see it. One of the other board members, a balding man named Fred, spoke up. The rules exist to maintain property values. If we let you keep an RV, everyone will want to do it. Next thing you know, the neighborhood looks like a trailer park. My RV cost $90,000, I shot back. It's probably worth more than some of the cars parked in driveways around here. The cost is irrelevant, Brenda chimed in. Rules are rules. They dismissed me and deliberated for all of 5 minutes before calling me back in. Linda read from a prepared statement. The board finds that Mr. Ashford has violated sections 7 and 12 of the community bylaws. The original fines of $500 each are upheld. Additionally, Mr. Ashford is assessed a fine of $1,000 per day, beginning tomorrow, until the recreational vehicle is removed from his property. Furthermore, the fine for unauthorized fence modification is upheld at $500. That's $1,500 already, plus $1,000 a day, I said, my voice rising. This is extortion. This is enforcement of rules you agreed to follow, Linda said coldly. You have the right to appeal to the Colorado courts if you disagree. This hearing is adjourned. I walked out of there angrier than I'd been in years. The next morning, I called Marcus Chen and told him what happened. They really went for the throat, he said. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Based on the documents you provided, I believe we have a strong argument that your property was never properly brought under the HOA's jurisdiction. The deed restrictions that apply to your parcel don't include the HOA covenants. They're trying to enforce rules they don't have the authority to enforce. So, what's the next step? I asked. We file suit in district court. We'll ask for a declaratory judgment stating that the HOA lacks authority over your property, and we'll seek an injunction preventing them from collecting these fines. It's going to cost you some legal fees up front, but if we're right, we can recover those costs from the HOA. I didn't have a lot of extra money lying around, but I was already on the hook for over $1,500 with more piling on every day. I authorized Marcus to move forward. The lawsuit was filed 3 days later in Jefferson County District Court. We sued the Sunset Heights Homeowners Association and Linda Patterson individually, asking the court to declare that the HOA had no authority over my property and that all fines were null and void. We also filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order to stop the daily fines while the case was pending. That's when things got really ugly. The day after Linda was served with the lawsuit, I came home to find a bright orange notice taped to my door. It was from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Whitmore and Associates, informing me that I was now banned from all HOA common areas, including the neighborhood park, walking trails, and community pool. Furthermore, they were placing a lien on my property for the unpaid fines, which now totaled $5,500. They can't just ban me, I told Marcus when I called him. I pay HOA dues for access to those amenities. They can if their bylaws give the board that authority, which they probably do, Marcus said. And yes, they can file a lien, though that doesn't mean it's valid. This is a pressure tactic. They're trying to make you back down. The hearing on our motion for a temporary restraining order was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, Linda launched what I can only call a campaign of harassment. She sent letters to all my neighbors warning them that I was a scofflaw who refused to follow community standards. She posted about me on the neighborhood's private Facebook group, though she didn't use my name, referring to a certain resident who thinks rules don't apply to him. My next-door neighbor, an older woman named Margaret who I'd always gotten along with, stopped me as I was checking my mail. "Owen, I don't know what's going on with you and the HOA, but Linda came by yesterday and told me I should be concerned about my property value." "It's about my RV," I explained. "It's parked in my backyard where no one can even see it, and they're fining me thousands of dollars." Margaret frowned. "That seems excessive. I can't see your backyard from my house." "Exactly," I said, "but they're claiming they have the authority to prohibit it entirely." She shook her head. "I've lived here for 12 years, and I've seen Linda go after several people. She acts like she owns the whole neighborhood. Most people just give in because it's easier than fighting." That conversation stayed with me. I started wondering how many other residents had been bullied by Linda and the HOA board over the years. I posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, carefully worded to avoid accusations, asking if anyone else had experienced issues with the HOA. The post was deleted within an hour, and I received a message from one of the group administrators saying that criticism of the HOA violated group rules. The day of the TRO hearing arrived. Marcus and I sat at one table in the courtroom while the HOA's lawyer, a stern woman named Patricia Whitmore, sat at the other. The judge was the Honorable Raymond Foster, a man in his 60s with reading glasses perched on his nose. Marcus presented our argument clearly and methodically. He showed the judge the original subdivision plat, the deed restrictions on my property, and the timeline of when various parcels were added to the HOA. His key point was that my property had never been formally included in the HOA through proper legal process. "Your Honor, Mr. Ashford's parcel was added to the subdivision 3 years after the original HOA was established," Marcus explained. "The CCRs recorded against his property make no mention of the homeowners association. The HOA is attempting to enforce restrictions that were never legally applied to this land." Patricia Whitmore stood to respond. "Your Honor, the HOA has treated Mr. Ashford's property as part of the community since it was developed. He's paid dues without objection for 2 years. He's accepted the benefits of HOA membership, including access to common areas. He can't now claim he's not bound by the rules simply because they've become inconvenient." Judge Foster leaned back in his chair. "Miss Whitmore, what's your response to the plaintiff's argument about the recorded deed restrictions?" "The CCRs were amended in 2021 to include the new section of the subdivision," she said. "That amendment was properly recorded." Marcus stood back up. "Your Honor, we've reviewed all recorded documents. There's no such amendment affecting my client's specific parcel." The 2021 amendment referenced by Ms. Whitmore applies to a different expansion on the north side of the development, not to my client's property. The judge asked to see the documents, and both attorneys approached the bench. There was a lengthy discussion I couldn't quite hear, with both lawyers pointing to various pages and speaking in low tones. Finally, Judge Foster sat back and addressed the courtroom. "Based on the preliminary evidence, I'm inclined to agree that there's a legitimate question about the HOA's jurisdiction over the plaintiff's property. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. The HOA is prohibited from assessing any additional fines against Mr. Ashford pending the resolution of this case. However, I'm not dismissing the existing fines at this time. That will be decided at trial. We'll set a scheduling conference for next month. It was a partial victory. At least the daily $1,000 fines would stop. But I was still facing $5,500 in alleged debt, and the lien on my property remained. Over the next few weeks, Marcus conducted discovery, requesting documents from the HOA. What he found was enlightening and disturbing. It turned out that my property wasn't the only one with questionable HOA jurisdiction. 3 other homes in the neighborhood had similar issues with their deed restrictions. More interestingly, the HOA's financial records showed that Linda Patterson had used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including a vacation to Hawaii that was supposedly a conference and renovations to the community center that primarily benefited the office she used. "This is bigger than we thought," Marcus told me during a meeting at his office. "Linda has been mismanaging HOA funds for years. Some of this could be criminal." "What do we do with this information?" I asked. "For now, we use it as leverage in your case. If Linda is shown to be acting improperly as HOA president, it undermines the association's credibility. But you might want to share these findings with other homeowners. They have a right to know how their dues are being spent." I thought about it carefully. I didn't want to start a war, but I also believed people deserved the truth. I printed out copies of the financial records Marcus had obtained through discovery, redacted to remove privileged information, and mailed them anonymously to every house in the neighborhood. The reaction was swift. Within 2 days, angry homeowners were flooding HOA board meetings demanding explanations. Linda tried to claim the expenses were legitimate, but the documentation was damning. The Hawaii trip had no connection to any actual HOA business. The community center renovations had included a private bathroom and kitchenette that only Linda had keys to access. A group of residents, led by Margaret, and a retired accountant named Tom Brennan, organized a recall effort. According to the HOA bylaws, 20% of homeowners could petition for a special election to remove board members. They gathered signatures quickly, and a vote was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Linda retaliated by doubling down. She sent me another violation notice, this time claiming my lawn was half an inch too tall and my mailbox needed repainting. Each violation came with a $250 fine. She also started driving by my house multiple times a day, taking pictures, apparently hoping to find something else to cite me for. One evening, I was grilling dinner in my backyard when I heard voices from the front yard. I walked around the side of the house and found Linda standing in my driveway with a tape measure, measuring something near my garage. Brenda stood next to her, taking notes. "What are you doing on my property?" I demanded. Linda didn't even look embarrassed. "Conducting an inspection." "Your garbage cans are stored within view of the street, which violates Section 9 of the bylaws." "My garbage cans are in the same place they've been for 2 years, I said, "where everyone else keeps their garbage cans." "Nevertheless, it's a violation," Brenda said, her pen scratching across her notepad. "Get off my property," I said firmly. Now, Linda straightened up, a tight smile on her face. "We have the right to conduct inspections under the bylaws." "You have the right to inspect common areas, not private property," I shot back. "Leave, or I'm calling the police." They left, but not before Linda handed me another yellow violation notice. I was now being fined for my garbage cans. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't costing me so much money and stress. The recall election took place on a Tuesday evening in October. The turnout was massive, with over 80% of homeowners voting. The results were unanimous. Linda Patterson, Brenda Kirkwood, and the 3 other board members were removed from their positions. A new board was elected immediately, with Tom Brennan as president and Margaret as vice president. One of the new board's first actions was to suspend all pending fines against homeowners, pending a comprehensive review of HOA enforcement practices. They also hired a forensic accountant to examine the HOA's finances in detail. What that accountant found led to criminal charges. Linda had embezzled over $40,000 from HOA funds over 3 years. The Hawaii trip was just the tip of the iceberg. She'd been writing checks to herself disguised as payments to contractors, billing the HOA for personal landscaping work at her own home, and even using the HOA credit card for personal shopping. Brenda had known about some of it and had received kickbacks to keep quiet. The Jefferson County District Attorney's Office filed charges against both women: theft, embezzlement, and fraud. Linda was arrested at her home on a Friday morning. I happened to be driving by when I saw the police cars in her driveway. I won't lie, there was a certain satisfaction in seeing her led out in handcuffs, though I also felt a bit sad that it had come to that. With the new board in place, Marcus approached them about settling my lawsuit. Tom Brennan was apologetic and reasonable. "Owen, we've reviewed your case and the previous board's actions," he said during a meeting at his house. "Frankly, you were treated appallingly. The legal analysis your attorney provided is sound. Your property shouldn't have been subject to those RV restrictions in the first place. The board has voted to drop all fines against you, remove the lien from your property, and reimburse your legal fees. It was almost too easy after months of fighting." "What about the RV?" I asked. "Can I keep it in my backyard?" Tom nodded. "As long as it's not visible from the street and you maintain your property properly, we have no issue with it. We're also planning to revise the bylaws to be more reasonable overall. This neighborhood should be a place where people want to live, not a dictatorship." The settlement was formalized in writing, and Marcus filed a dismissal of the lawsuit. The HOA paid me $12,000 to cover my legal fees, plus a formal apology. I kept the RV right where it was in my backyard and took several wonderful trips in it over the following months. The trial for Linda Patterson and Brenda Kirkwood was held the following spring. I was called as a witness to testify about the harassment and improper fines. The prosecution built a strong case showing a pattern of abuse of power and financial misconduct. Linda tried to claim she'd simply made accounting errors, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury convicted Linda on all counts. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA. Brenda pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received probation plus community service. Both women were also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. The new HOA board transformed Sunset Heights. They reduced dues by 20% once they eliminated wasteful spending and Linda's theft. They revised the bylaws to focus on actual community concerns rather than petty aesthetic control. They even built a small RV parking area on HOA property near the community center, so residents could store recreational vehicles without cluttering their own yards. I considered moving my RV there, but I'd grown fond of having it in my backyard where I could work on it and prepare for trips easily. One Saturday afternoon, about a year after the whole mess started, I was washing my RV in the backyard when Margaret came over with a plate of cookies. She'd become a good friend through the ordeal. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. setting the cookies on my patio table. If you hadn't stood up to Linda, she'd still be running this place like her personal kingdom. I just wanted to keep my RV, I said with a laugh. I didn't set out to take down the HOA board. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance make the biggest difference, Margaret replied. You showed everyone else that it was possible to fight back. That mattered. She was right, in a way. After my case, 3 other homeowners successfully challenged questionable fines and violations. The culture of the neighborhood changed from one of fear and compliance to one of community and cooperation. People actually started talking to each other again, instead of worrying about being reported for minor infractions. Marcus Chen called me a few months later with an interesting update. Remember how we found that several properties had the same jurisdictional issues as yours? He asked. Yeah, I said. Well, those homeowners got together and negotiated with the HOA to formalize their membership on their own terms. They're now part of the association by choice, with written agreements that give them slightly different rules that account for their property's unique characteristics. It's actually a pretty elegant solution. That's great, I said. I'm glad something positive came out of all this legal chaos. You know, your case has become something of a legend in HOA law circles here in Colorado, Marcus continued. I've had 3 other attorneys call me asking about the strategy we used. It turns out a lot of HOAs have similar issues with jurisdiction over annexed properties, but most people don't know they can challenge it. I found that both encouraging and disturbing. How many people were paying dues and following rules they weren't legally bound to, simply because they didn't know any better. The final chapter in the saga came when I received a letter from the Colorado Division of Real Estate, which regulates HOAs in the state. They'd investigated the Sunset Heights HOA following Linda's criminal conviction and had found widespread violations of state law in how the association was managed. The division implemented new oversight requirements and used our case as a training example for HOA board members across the state. I framed that letter and hung it in my garage, right next to where I park the RV. It serves as a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, even when the opposition seems overwhelming. It also reminds me to read the fine print before agreeing to anything, a lesson I learned the hard way. Sarah and I took the RV on an extended trip that summer, driving through Wyoming, Montana, and into Canada. We were gone for 6 weeks, and it was glorious. When we came back, tanned and relaxed, I backed the RV into my backyard without a second thought. No one sent violation notices. No one measured my lawn or inspected my garbage cans. The new HOA board sent a friendly newsletter welcoming us home and reminding everyone about the upcoming neighborhood barbecue. That barbecue was a revelation. Under Linda's reign, HOA events had been stiff, formal affairs where everyone walked on eggshells. The new board threw a casual cookout with games for kids, cold beer for adults, and a genuine sense of community. People laughed and joked, and several neighbors asked me about my RV trips and shared their own travel dreams. Tom Brennan cornered me by the grill, flipping burgers with an expert hand. You know, Owen, I've been thinking about getting an RV myself. My wife and I are retiring next year and we want to see the country. Do it, I said enthusiastically. Best purchase I've ever made, despite all the headache it caused initially. That wasn't the RV's fault, Tom said with a grin. That was Linda being Linda. At least now we can all enjoy our homes without fear of the HOA Gestapo showing up. I raised my beer in agreement. I'll drink to that. As the sun set over the neighborhood that evening, I looked around at my neighbors chatting and enjoying themselves, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Yes, the fight with the HOA had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. Yes, I'd lost sleep and spent hours in lawyers' offices and courtrooms. But the outcome had been worth it, not just for me but for everyone in Sunset Heights. The legal principle established by my case was simple but important. Property rights matter. An HOA can't simply impose restrictions without proper legal authority, no matter how many official-looking notices they send. Homeowners have the right to use their property as they see fit, within reasonable bounds. And an HOA's power comes from recorded deed restrictions, not from self-appointed enforcers like Linda Patterson. I also learned that most bullies, whether individuals or organizations, back down when confronted with serious resistance. Linda's power came from people's fear and willingness to comply. The moment homeowners stood together and said no, her authority evaporated. The criminal charges and conviction were just the final nails in the coffin. My RV still sits in my backyard, waiting for the next adventure. I've taken it on half a dozen trips since that first disastrous parking job that started everything. Each time I fire up the engine and hit the road, I think about how close I came to giving in to Linda's demands. If I'd moved the RV to a storage facility, paid the fines, and slunk away quietly, she'd still be terrorizing the neighborhood and embezzling HOA funds. Sometimes being stubborn pays off. The legal fees were worth every penny. Marcus Chen became a friend as well as my attorney, and he still calls occasionally to update me on other HOA cases he's handling. Apparently, my story has inspired several other homeowners in Colorado to stand up to overreaching associations. Some have won, some have lost, but all of them have forced their HOAs to think twice before issuing arbitrary fines and restrictions. Margaret still brings me cookies occasionally, and we've become close friends. She's mentioned several times that she wishes someone had stood up to Linda years ago, before the board became so entrenched and corrupt. I remind her that she was the one who led the recall effort, which took its own kind of courage. Taking on an established power structure, even in something as seemingly mundane as a neighborhood association, is never easy. The forensic audit of the HOA's finances revealed even more problems than initially suspected. Linda had been manipulating records for years, creating false invoices and dummy companies to siphon money. The total amount she stole was eventually calculated at nearly $60,000. Her 18-month sentence seemed light to many residents, but the judge noted that she'd made partial restitution and shown remorse, which I personally doubted was genuine. Brenda Kirkwood moved out of the neighborhood shortly after her conviction. I heard through the grapevine that she and her husband divorced, largely because of the scandal and his anger at her involvement in Linda's schemes. I felt a little bad for her family, but she'd made her choices and had to live with the consequences. The new bylaws approved by the reformed HOA board were a masterpiece of reasonable governance. Instead of pages of petty restrictions about lawn height, mailbox colors, and vehicle storage, the new rules focused on genuine quality of life issues. No commercial operations that would create traffic problems. No unsafe structures. No activities that would genuinely harm property values. The RV rule was revised to simply require that recreational vehicles be stored in a manner that doesn't obstruct streets or sidewalks. My backyard parking arrangement was explicitly approved as a model for how to do it right. I've thought a lot about why Linda became the person she was. Some people suggested she was just power-hungry, others that she had control issues, and a few speculated that she'd always been dishonest and saw the HOA presidency as an opportunity to steal. I think it was probably a combination of factors. She'd been given authority without sufficient oversight, and over time, she'd come to believe that the neighborhood really was hers to control. The embezzlement probably started small, maybe with her justifying minor expenses as compensation for her time, and then it grew as she realized no one was watching closely. The lesson for me, and for anyone dealing with an HOA, is that oversight matters. The homeowners in Sunset Heights had been too passive, too willing to let someone else handle things. When people abdicate responsibility for governance, whether in a neighborhood association, a company, or a country, bad actors fill the vacuum. The new board implemented quarterly financial reports, annual audits, and term limits to prevent another Linda from emerging. I've also become something of an accidental advocate for HOA reform. Several local news outlets ran stories about my case, and I've been interviewed a few times about the experience. I always emphasize the same points. Read your documents before you buy, know your rights, and don't be afraid to push back against unreasonable demands. I also stress the importance of getting involved in your HOA rather than ignoring it until there's a problem. If the Sunset Heights homeowners had been paying attention to what Linda was doing years ago, things never would have gotten so bad. My relationship with the current HOA board is excellent. Tom Brennan is a fair and thoughtful president who genuinely cares about the community. He's consulted me on several policy decisions, valuing my perspective as someone who went through the legal battle. I've tried to be helpful without being overbearing, offering input when asked, but not trying to run things myself. I have no desire to be on the board, but I do attend meetings regularly and vote on important issues. The community center that Linda had renovated with embezzled funds was eventually redone properly with legitimate contractor bids and HOA approval. The private bathroom and kitchenette she'd built for herself were converted into storage space for community equipment. It's a small thing, but every time I see it, I feel a sense of justice. That space now serves everyone, not just one self-important board president. Sarah and I got engaged during one of our RV trips at a campsite overlooking the Grand Tetons. We're planning to take the RV on an extended honeymoon after the wedding, driving down the Pacific Coast Highway to San Diego and then across the southern route to Florida. I've already plotted the route and identified all the best campgrounds. The RV that caused so much trouble has become central to my happiness, which is ironic in a way. I sometimes drive by Linda's old house. A nice young couple bought it after the foreclosure, and they've fixed it up beautifully. They came to one of the neighborhood barbecues and seemed genuinely excited to be part of the community. When they learned I was the RV guy who'd fought the old board, they thanked me profusely. Apparently, they'd almost bought in a different neighborhood with an HOA known for being strict, but they'd chosen Sunset Heights specifically because they'd read about the reforms. That conversation made me realize that the case had an impact beyond just my own situation. Sunset Heights had a reputation now as a neighborhood with a reasonable, well-managed HOA. Property values had actually increased since the reforms, contrary to Linda's dire predictions about RVs destroying home prices. It turns out that people value living in a community where they're treated with respect more than they value rigid aesthetic conformity. Marcus sent me a final bill about 6 months after the settlement, noting that the HOA had paid for everything, and I owed nothing out of pocket. In fact, after all the reimbursements, I actually came out slightly ahead financially. More importantly, I'd established a legal precedent that helped other homeowners and exposed corruption that needed to be addressed. Not many people can say their personal dispute led to criminal convictions and systemic reform. I've kept all the violation notices Linda sent me, stored in a folder in my filing cabinet. Sometimes I take them out and read through them, marveling at the petness and hostility in every line. $500 for parking my RV in my driveway for 2 days. $500 for temporarily removing a fence section. $250 for garbage cans in a standard location. It's almost impressive how much anger and control were packed into those yellow sheets of paper. The garbage cans are still in the same place, by the way. No one has said a word about them in over a year. It's amazing how many violations disappeared once Linda was gone. It's almost as if they were never really about community standards at all, but about one person's need to dominate others. I've also kept the judge's order granting the temporary restraining order. That document represents the moment when the tide turned, when a neutral authority looked at the situation and said that the HOA had overstepped its bounds. Judge Foster's ruling was careful and measured, acknowledging that HOAs serve a legitimate purpose while also recognizing that their power isn't unlimited. That balance is what good governance looks like. The neighborhood has continued to thrive under the new board. Several families with young children have moved in, attracted by the playground the HOA installed in the common area using funds that were previously being embezzled. The walking trails are better maintained than ever. The annual neighborhood directory is actually useful now, instead of being mostly a list of rules and regulations. Small changes, but they add up to a fundamentally different living experience. I've thought about writing a book about the whole experience, a how-to guide for homeowners dealing with difficult HOAs. Marcus thinks it would sell well, given the number of people struggling with similar issues. I haven't decided yet. Part of me wants to move on and just enjoy my home and my RV without constantly reliving the battle. But another part of me knows that sharing the story could help people who are currently facing the same bullying and intimidation I dealt with. For now, I'm content with my life in Sunset Heights. My house is my castle, as the saying goes, and my backyard is my RV depot. I've learned to appreciate the simple freedom of using my property as I see fit, without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment. It's a freedom I once took for granted and will never take for granted again. The RV itself is aging well. I've put about 15,000 miles on it over the past year and a half, and it's been remarkably reliable. I've learned to do basic maintenance myself, which has saved money and given me a better understanding of the vehicle. There's something satisfying about working on a machine that's taken me to so many beautiful places. Each oil change and tire rotation is an investment in future adventures. Sarah has taken to RV life enthusiastically. She's better at backing it up than I am, which I've admitted to her only under duress. She's also a genius at meal planning and cooking in the small galley kitchen. We've developed a rhythm on the road that works for both of us, with her handling navigation and campsite reservations while I deal with driving and mechanical issues. It's a partnership in every sense. The wedding is planned for next June, outdoors at a mountain venue west of Denver. We debated whether to have it at the neighborhood community center, but ultimately decided we wanted something with a view of the Rockies. Several of my Sunset Heights neighbors are invited, including Margaret and Tom, who have become genuine friends. Marcus Chen is coming too. It seems only right to celebrate with the people who helped me win my battle. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm struck by how a simple decision to buy an RV led to such a complicated chain of events. If I'd chosen a different hobby, or if I'd bought a house in a different neighborhood, or if Linda Patterson had been a reasonable person, none of this would have happened. But then again, Linda would still be stealing from the HOA. Homeowners would still be living in fear of violation notices, and I wouldn't have the friendships and sense of community I have now. There's a philosophical question buried in there somewhere about whether conflict is sometimes necessary for positive change. I think it is. Comfortable situations breed complacency, and complacency allows bad actors to thrive. It took my stubborn refusal to pay unjust fines to expose the rot in the HOA leadership. If I'd been more agreeable, more willing to go along to get along, that rot would have continued spreading. I'm not naturally a rebel or an activist. I'm a software developer who likes his routines and his peace and quiet. But sometimes circumstances demand that ordinary people stand up and fight, even when it's uncomfortable and expensive and stressful. I did that, and I'm proud of it. The outcome validated every hour of lost sleep and every dollar of legal fees. The RV sits in my backyard right now as I write this, gleaming in the afternoon sun. I washed it yesterday in preparation for a weekend trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. Sarah and I are going to celebrate our engagement anniversary at the same campsite where I proposed. It's become a tradition, returning to meaningful places and creating new memories there. When I walk out my back door and see that 32-foot vehicle parked on my own land, I feel a sense of triumph that hasn't faded with time. That RV represents freedom, adventure, and the principle that property rights matter. It's also a monument to the idea that individuals can fight back against institutional bullying and win, even when the odds seem long. Linda Patterson is serving her sentence at the State Correctional Facility in Cannon City. I don't think about her often, but when I do, I hope she's learned something from the experience. I doubt it, honestly. People like Linda rarely change. They see themselves as victims of unfair persecution rather than accepting responsibility for their actions. But that's her problem now, not mine. My property, my rules. That's the bottom line. Within the bounds of law and basic decency, I get to decide how to use my land. An HOA can have legitimate authority if it's properly established and reasonably exercised. But when an association oversteps those bounds, homeowners have the right and the responsibility to push back. That's what I did, and that's what anyone in a similar situation should do. The judge said the HOA couldn't regulate my private land the way they were trying to. He was right, both legally and morally. That ruling freed me from unjust fines, but more importantly, it freed me from the psychological burden of living under arbitrary authority. I don't have to wonder anymore whether some busybody with a clipboard is going to show up at my door threatening me with penalties for living my life. That freedom is worth more than any dollar amount. As I finish writing this account, the sun is setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across my backyard. The RV stands ready for the next journey, a faithful companion that inadvertently sparked a revolution in my quiet neighborhood. Tomorrow, Sarah and I will load it up with supplies and hit the road, leaving behind the memories of violation notices and courtroom battles. But those memories have shaped who I am now. Someone who knows his rights, values his freedom, and isn't afraid to stand up to bullies, whether they wear badges, carry clipboards, or sit behind official-looking tables pretending to represent community interests. My story isn't unique, but it had a good ending, and that gives me hope for others facing similar battles. HOAs aren't going away, and neither are people like Linda Patterson, who see positions of minor authority as opportunities for control and self-enrichment. But knowledge is power, and the law is often on the side of homeowners if they're willing to invoke it. That's my message to anyone reading this. Know your rights, Document everything, and don't be intimidated by official-sounding threats. Your home is your sanctuary, and you have more power to protect it than you might think. The RV that caused all this trouble has given me some of the best experiences of my life. It's taken me to places I'd only seen in photographs before, from the deserts of Utah to the forests of Washington. It strengthened my relationship with Sarah and taught me self-reliance and problem-solving. And yes, it exposed corruption and led to systemic reform in my neighborhood. Not bad for $90,000 and a stubborn refusal to back down from a fight I knew was right. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat.